Good morning and welcome to the Classic Horrors Club podcast video companion. I'm Jeff Owens from classichorrors.club.
And I am Richard Chamberlain from monstermoviekid.wordpress.com.
For those of you watching for the countdown to Halloween, welcome to day 20. On this month's episode of the audio podcast, Richard reminds us that the cover for Famous Monsters of Filmland number 124, cover dated April 1976, was the only time a Mexican monster movie was featured on the cover. Indeed, it was. It's a gorgeous Ken Kelly painting of Herman Robles as El Vampiro. However, when I flipped through its pages, I learned that it was not the only time Mexican monster movies were featured inside Famous Monsters. In fact, the article in 124 is part 3 of a 4-part series, and that changed the course of today's video by quite a bit. And got on the phone with Richard, and we're going to take a look at all 4 of these issues this entire series. The first one is issue 121, another gorgeous Ken Kelly cover, this time with Boris Karloff as Imhotep. And part 1 of the series titled Monsters from Mexico, Terror from Below the Border, written by Walt Lee. The introduction, I assume, was written by Forey Ackerman, and it introduces the series by saying, now in a 2 or possibly even 3-part feature that will be referred to for years to come as the definitive Mexican monster movie guide, we bring you the results of 20 years of research by the celebrated creator of the legendary Reference Guide to Fantastic Films. Disclaimer: after we read the entire series, we were reminded that this is Famous Monsters, not known for its academic excellence. So this is not a definitive list. Take it with a grain of salt. Now, as we mentioned on the podcast, Walt Lee tells us that prior to the mid-50s, very few Mexic creatures had reared their ugly heads. He mentions one film that we talked about, The Phantom of the Convent from 1934. It was in 1952 that, quote, the Mexican screen began to be filled with a lumbering, slinking, shuffling horror horde. It started with The Resurrected Monster in 1952, but really got going in 1956 with The Body Snatcher and El Vampiro, the subject of our podcast episode. Oddly, there's nothing else in this entire series about El Vampiro or its sequel, El Etude del Vampiro. In this 10-page article, Walt Lee, quote, takes us on a spree south of the border to view a Mexican movie marathon. And with all of that introduction, there's only a few movies discussed in this issue. We've got The Body Snatcher from 1956, Nostradamus, Nostradamus? Sorry. From 1959, which you mentioned as well, but I did not realize that was a 10-part serial to begin with, and then it was put together into 4 features.
Yeah, that's kind of common. There's this they did that with a lot of other films. In fact, the very first kind of pre-Santo appearance was also done in kind of the Mexican version of chapter serials, and then eventually was released in its film form. So that's done more than once. And to the best of my knowledge, the serial versions no longer exist. I mean, we're good to get the film versions in our hands, which most of those haven't even been released officially. So yeah, I want to backtrack. You mentioned The Body Snatcher. I have seen that movie, and that's actually a very good film, and actually is covered again in one of my articles that I'll be mentioning here in a little bit. The Nostradamus films, as you said, we talked about on the podcast, and I wish we can get the Spanish language version of those. Those are actually pretty good. The 4-film series, and you can really kind of watch them consecutively, and they do kind of follow continuity, I guess, from film to film. It's one big story, more or less, in kind of a choppy way.
Do you know the names of the 4 movies released in America?
I do. There's the Curse of Nostradamus, the Monster Demolisher, the Genie of Darkness, and the Blood of Nostradamus.
Oh, very good. You get a pin or a medal or something.
Hey.
4 more movies discussed Frankenstein, the Vampire and Company. Did not say what year that was. I can't find it on IMDb. I think, again, this is Famous Monsters. Some of these are a little suspicious. Do you know anything about that one?
Well, and sometimes the titles too,
Yes.
have changed over the years or known by multiple titles. So I want to say this is like the 1960s, kind of a Abbott and Costello comedy, there's a lot of like Mexican comedians who appear in some of these films that I'm not familiar with 100%, and you take it with a grain of salt. What I've seen hasn't necessarily made me want to see more, but I'm always open-minded. For example, there's a Santo film called Santo versus Capulina, which what I've seen of it, Santo's playing second fiddle to the comedy, and I love good horror comedies, but I struggle sometimes where you're taking like what's supposed to be a serious character and then pairing him up with a comedian. It seemed kind of an odd choice, and ultimately is not referred to or remembered as one of the better Santo films. So I've I'm pretty sure this Frankenstein film is from the 60s, but I don't, that's about all I know about it.
Santo played second fiddle, huh? I didn't know he was a musician as well as a wrestler and an actor and a superhero.
He was a man of, as they used to call the Shadow, the wealthy man about town. He had a man of many talents.
I'm going to rattle these last three off, and then I know you have more information about some of these. One was called The Macabre Path from about 1962, Adventure at the Center of the Earth from 1965, and then Dinosaur Island from 1966, which contains apparently a lot of stock footage from 1 million BC in 1940.
Yeah, so the Macabre Path, I actually discovered this movie last summer, or I guess the summer of 24 now, which wouldn't be last summer, it'd be the summer before last summer. Our good buddy Juan from Fifth Dimension Films, where you can get probably all the films we're mentioning here. He said, "Hey, I've got a film you need to see, and come by my booth." And so I came by my booth, and he handed me this DVD called Rostro Infernal, which is actually a two-part film. And again, I think it was possibly filmed as a serial and kind of pieced together as two films, but part one being Face of Hell or Rostro Infernal, and part two being The Macabre Trail
Hmm.
or La Muela Macabra. So Macabre Path is probably another title it was known as, but actually, yeah, kind of a two-part film, and it's kind of yeah, it's kind of like a vampire film, I guess is the best way to describe it. It was actually really good. We really enjoyed it. We covered it on the blog, monstermoviekid.wordpress.com, last year. I believe it was day 31 of our countdown to Halloween.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we kind of, both Carl and I, of course, she loves all these Mexican horror films. So we covered it because, I had to get that in. Juan gave it, to me. So I guess I got to cover it. And it was pretty good. Yeah. Before that, I had never heard of it. Adventure at the Center of the Earth. I just became aware of this because our friend Steve got a copy from Juan at the most recent Monster Bash, so it's now on my wish list. And Dinosaur Island, I've been vaguely familiar of. I knew that it contained a lot of stock footage. Also something I have not seen, but I'm interested in.
I will say Adventure at the Center of the Earth had possibly the most pictures in the magazines than any other movie, and they weren't just contained to the issue I covered. In future installments, they would throw in pictures from Adventure at the Center of Earth, and that does look interesting. There's lots of cool looking creatures in that.
Yeah, that looks fun.
You want to take us through the next magazine?
Yeah, so issue number 122 has, I don't have the magazines here in front of me, but if you have in front, you can share that it features Ingrid Pitt on the cover, another cover by Ken Kelly. And this covers some films that I was not aware of. And again, I'm in this rabbit hole now, and I'm aware of a lot of Mexican horror films, but I had not heard of the Dr. Satan films before. Dr. Satan from 1966 is about a psychiatrist covering his real identity of Dr. Satan, who is a sorcerer of the oldest voodoo god named King Satan. A lot of originality there, but I'm interested. Why not? And then they did a sequel called Dr. Satan and Black Magic in 67. in which King Satan orders Dr. Satan to stop a rival voodoo cult ran by Ye Lin. So apparently there's Asian voodoo cults. Count me in on that as well. The next movie that they covered, this one sounds so bonkers, I've got to check it out. Autopsy of a Ghost from 1967. Now, he has basically two actors are credited, and who he has them playing is different than what IMDb lists. So I'm almost
So
willing
that's
to
a
say,
that's a Sophie's choice. Like, which one do you
well,
trust between those two?
yeah, and I'm almost willing to bet maybe IMDb might be more accurate because we know a little bit more about these films. But it's so we'll go with what IMDb says. John Carradine playing Satan and Basil Rathbone playing Canuto Perez. And Perez commits suicide, and Satan, being the loving, caring person that he is, decides to offer him eternal peace if he can find a woman who loves him. And he gives him three choices: a woman who is half insane, a sassy and superstitious maid, and a female robot. And you've also got Cameron Mitchell playing a mad inventor. So, sure, why not? I've got to check this one out. Batwoman from 1967 is covered, or this movie is quite a bit well known now. It stars Maura Monti and is directed by Rene Cardona, who is not mentioned in the mag. Shot in Acapulco, it's a female lucha libre film. It's now available on Blu-ray from Indicator. I think we might have covered this last year on the blog. I know I got it last year. As with all the Indicator releases, they're great. Got a lot of fun stuff in there. And it's I kind of think of a female Santo. It is bonkers, and it's not a great film, but it does cross that line at times of being so bad it's good. So if you
Is that
haven't,
the same as what the Wild World of the Batwoman or something?
I think they're two
Oh, okay.
different films. Don't quote me on that. Um, because again, the titles get confused. We have Lady Death from 1968, starring John Carradine again, playing a mad scientist who needs fresh blood from women to cure a disfigured woman, which that plot sounds very familiar. We have House of Madness from 1971 about a madman taking over an asylum on his first step to conquering the world, as you do. I'm interested in both of those films. Then we have Super Zan and the Space Boy from 1972. Super Zan being a superhuman character when Space Boy comes from outer space. They're battling a mad scientist supervillain who is building robots to take over the world. I don't know if this one's on my list. The next two, though, are Devil's Women from 1972 has been described as the Mexican Rosemary's Baby. That has me more than intrigued. And then The Man and the Beast from 1972, or The Man and the Monster, is a Jekyll and Hyde take with the characters being called Dr. Duval and Mr. Ray. And this is different than the 1958 version, which was released by Casa Negra several years ago now, which stars Abel Salazar and was directed by Rafael Baladon. So, but that's also kind of a Jekyll and Hyde story. So I don't know if the 72 version's a remake or not, but something I'm interested in. There's a whole section on Restless Wrestlers, which goes into a bit more description of the Body Snatcher, which stars Wolf Ravinskis, plays a wrestler who dies and is brought back to life with the brain of a gorilla, as you do. There's the Neutron movies, which I've been aware of. They list all the Neutron films, kind of Santo-esque, but they're much lower budget. And I've never seen one. I've been curious about those. I'm nearing the end of my Santo films that I want to see. There's some that I'm going to bypass from the 70s that I'm not as interested in because by that point the Santo films were really degrading in quality. But I am interested in the Neutron films, which come from mostly the early 60s. They also talk about he highlighted the horror films of Santo and Blue Demon. such as Samson and the Vampire Women, Santo versus Frankenstein's Daughter, Santo versus Black Magic. Of course, I've seen all of those, and they're all a lot of fun. There's also a section on Santo and Blue Demon versus the Monsters, the 1970 movie, and then some briefer highlights of Santo and the Treasure of Dracula, and Santo and Blue Demon in Atlantis. So a lot of films were covered in part two. I thought part two was really well done, and definitely added some lists to or some films to my wish list.
Interesting. We're now well into the 70s and we're only halfway through the series. I think if we can put ourselves back however many years that was, I'm not going to say it because I'll pass out. But um, I feel like maybe I don't know if some of the films weren't discovered yet. That's why we don't hear about some of those that we know about now, or if it was an editorial choice just not to include them.
Well,
And
like the Brainiac was a huge, yeah, a huge miss. I don't, and the Brainiac should have been known because that was dubbed. K. Gordon Murray released that. I don't know on the choice, and I think it was covered in Famous Monsters at one point. And dare I say, maybe even on the cover or featured somehow. Maybe
hmm,
not on the cover, but I know it was featured in Famous Monsters. So I don't know why Walter Lee, who clearly knew his stuff, he knew Mexican horror films at a time when very few people would have, why they chose to bypass that or bypass the El Vampiro films or bypass The Man and the Monster from 58. Now it's possible that film wasn't known in the mid 70s. Yeah, some interesting choices.
are you familiar with this author today, or was this the first you had heard of him?
I'd never heard of Walter Lee and or Walt Lee as he's here, and I did a little bit of research into him. I'm interested in these three books that he did. I don't know if you were aware that he put out three books.
No.
So he was definitely a film historian, and he did a three-volume book series called Reference Guide to Fantastic Films. I did a quick search on eBay. All three volumes are available right now for like $35. Um, Now, it does look like it is very much just like a reference, and even a reference guide might be a stretch, but it's got the titles of the films. It doesn't look like it's articles based on the pictures from eBay, but it's a list of a lot of films and a little information about it, um, which interests me greatly. This book series looks kind of cool because I'm wondering, what you might be able to find, some forgotten film that we haven't talked about in the last 50 years might be referenced in those books. But he passed away about 11 years ago in 2014 at the age of 83. Here I am, the angel
As
of
I said,
death.
we're not to the end of the episode yet. You're supposed to save the death as our.
Well, we got more fun stuff to talk about, but he passed away after a long battle of Alzheimer's, and it struck me as kind of sad because, man, a film historian who obviously had a wealth of knowledge, that's probably one of the worst things that could happen to somebody is to have that knowledge taken from you. And who knows, what was lost when he passed away. But it was referenced on the Tapatalk forum, which is on the Classic Horror Films board. I think it was Tom Weaver gave a shout out to the book series because saying at one time it was, a Bible for a lot of people. I had never heard of the film series. For me, my Bible has always been the classics of the horror film by Everson, but a lot of people were aware of this. So the books are out there. Again, I'm almost willing to pull the trigger on getting these three books. I might do it unless somebody beats me to it. But yeah, I'm not familiar enough with what other stuff he might have done for Famous Monsters, but he made some choices and stuff that he didn't cover, but he clearly knew his Mexican horror films by some of the deep dives that he did cover. And some films, again, like we've been mentioning, for example, like the Devil's Women from 72. I've not heard that referenced recently anyway. I mean, and that's Mexican Rosemary's Baby. So it just might be it's not available, and here we are 5 decades later. That's how long it's been since these articles came out. Some of these films have some films are more well known now, and some films are just still not talked about.
Mentioned these movies aren't just listed. You mentioned his knowledge. There are sometimes several paragraphs long of
Yes.
plot synopsis for these movies. And by the way, each article is 10 pages long, lots of photos, except the last one, which you'll get to, is I think only 7 pages long. So what is that, 37 pages of
Yeah,
Mexican?
it's there's a lot of fun details about the movies. We're just kind of mentioning the titles, but yeah, as you said, he goes into them and adds some tidbits and information, some humor. The pictures in the articles don't necessarily go with the movies that they're covering in that article, um, but they'll cover movies that are talked about in other parts. I don't know. Again, creative choices, not made by either you or I, but you get a lot of cool pictures from these films. So these are fun articles, absolutely.
So now to issue 124. This is the one we described in the opening of the video. And by the way, I do not have 122 with Ingrid Pitt. That is on my wish list. So that's why
Ah,
I didn't hold it up. I misled you earlier, but I had my issues wrong and thought I did have all four. So,
okay.
Richard, guess what? I have a Doctor Who reference.
Ah.
This issue has an article called The Daleks Are Coming, although it is about the Peter Cushing doctor. So I don't know if you're going to count that or not, but you should give me credit for trying.
Famous Monsters covered Doctor Who. In fact, I don't have very many famous monsters in my collection. I have, I think, three, maybe four, but one of them I have is a Doctor Who on the cover,
I know who you're
highlighting
talking about.
all the monsters. So I've got that one.
Yeah. Also want to mention this issue has a 4.5 page article on the Hindenburg, which we covered in December 2023
Yeah,
in our episode called Disaster December, along with Black Sunday. So this seems a bit early, but we do know post Star Wars famous monster takes a turn. And actually, I'm kind of glad because I include disaster movies on my blog. We include it on the podcast because that is a type of horror.
it
In
is.
a dirigible that explodes and crashes, that's horrific. So the movies they talk about here, Revenge of the Vampire Women, which is about 1969, and then some of the Santo movies, Santo versus Frankenstein's Daughter, Santo and the Mummy's Vengeance, those are both from 1971. Santo Faces Black Magic from 1972, and Santo and Blue Demon versus Dracula and the Wolfman from 1972. That is, I think, with John Carradine. Can you confirm that?
John Carradine is not in any Santo films,
Hmm.
no.
All right, well, it says he was. So. And The Beast of Terror from 1971. Now, in addition to the male wrestlers, there were a group of women wrestlers that have appeared in a series of Mexican films, many which have horror content. Wrestling Women versus the Murderer, I'm sure, also known as Doctor of Doom from
Yeah.
1962. Wrestling Women versus the Aztec Mummy, The Panther Women from 1972, Wrestling Women versus the Murdering Robot. I think, did you mention something about a murdering robot? Or that was a plot point in
Yeah,
something?
that was the plot point, yes. Might be the same one, though.
Yeah. The Incredible Professor Zovek from 1972. This was about a new superhero who acquired his paranormal powers after extensive studies in Tibetan monasteries. And then it had a sequel, Invasion of the Dead, that was released in the same year.
And I've added both of these films to my wish list.
Anything you want to add to that series of films?
No, no, I think Panther Women, that was released by Indicator as well, wasn't it?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was because my movies are in the other room or I would look on my shelf. But yeah, that also got a release and that was pretty good as well. The Lucha Libre, uh, the term just totally left my head, but the female Lucha Libre, which is not correct, there's not very many of them, and they're generally not considered on par with the Santo films or the Mil Mascaras films. But the few that I've seen were entertaining, and I'd be totally open to seeing a few more. Like I've seen parts of the Wrestling Women versus the Aztec Mummy, and I would be totally down to see the rest of that film and Doctor of Doom as well. So those are films that I kind of forget about, but as we sit here and talk about them, I need to hunt those films down and add those to the list.
All right, us off with part four.
Well, this is where you can help me a little bit because I went through archive.org, which is wonderful. You can get the Famous Monsters magazines there, but sometimes the scans aren't 100% clear. Issue 125 had King Kong on the cover. Can you tell me who the artist was?
Well, I cannot remember. I intended to look that up. It says inside it's just Paramount's conceptual artist,
Okay.
something, but does not list who. Do you know?
I couldn't make that out.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's why I was like, I need you to tell me because it was a little blurry on the scan. Part four, which ultimately is now the final part of the series. And it starts off with a really fun section on the Guanajuato mummies. There was a series of Guanajuato mummy films, and that's actually a real thing. They're based on real mummies in Guanajuato. They're in catacombs, and it's a tourist attraction because why not? The history, they talk a little bit about this in the magazine, but adding a few more details here for you. So the bodies were originally in the Santa Paula Cemetery, but at the time you had to pay like a rental fee to be in the cemetery. It wasn't like you just bought your plot, you were charged a monthly rent. And if you didn't pay the rent, the body gets dug up and gets thrown into a catacomb where, it can stay essentially. It's not like they return the bodies to the families, but the bodies are exhumed, and it just seems morbid. It's like, hey, you skipped, you're 90 days late. We're going to dig up grandma. So the bodies then start to become mummified remains, and they're stored in a building that's above ground, but they're preserved. And now that building is a museum. It's a popular tourist attraction. About 1965, it opened up as a museum. It draws thousands of visitors every year. There's a wide variety of mummies, including infants, which to me sounds incredibly morbid. They're displayed in the clothing, that they were buried in. So, and some of the mummies go back like 200 years. So they are featured in some of these movies, the images and such. I think there's a Santo movie as well that has the Guanajuato mummies, but they talk about specifically the castle of the mummies of Guanajuato from 72, starring Super Zan, Blue Angel, and gonna butcher the name, but Tinieblas. And this has to do with a mad scientist devil worshiper. Again, why
Interesting
not?
combo.
Yes. We have The Theft of the Mummies of Guanajuato from 72. This is a Mil Mascaras movie. He didn't make as many movies as Santo, and his movies aren't necessarily as popular. But I think when you look in wrestling history, Mil Mascaras was still wrestling just a few years ago. I think he is, I don't know if he's at an official retirement. I don't know how old he is. Mil Mascaras is perhaps more well known in the wrestling world than Santo because he wrestled longer on and because he came along a little bit later, he made it into the modern day professional wrestling. He's in the WWE Hall of Fame and has been featured on their programming as well over the years. So, but Mil Mascaras films are fun. I don't think they're as fun as Santo, but still, there's a whole plethora of Mil Mascaras films out there. And so at least two of them were Guanajuato films. The article then takes an odd turn because then it mentions Paul Naschy. And I'm like, Paul Naschy, is not Mexican horror, it's Spanish horror. Well, they cover a movie called The Return of Walpurgis Night, 1973. And this is a collaboration between Spain and Mexico, and it gives a pretty good detail of the film. It's one of the Vladimir Daninsky werewolf films, but I was trying to figure out which film this is. Like again, Euro horror films have a plethora of titles sometimes, and this is actually The Curse of the Devil.
Hmm.
And I have it. I've seen it. It's pretty good. It's one of the, I think, dare I say, better Daninsky films. I think, there was several that in this time period that were really good. And this is a good one, I think. But it's not choice to include it because my understanding is that it is mostly a Spanish horror film, but apparently, based on the article, there is, a tie to Mexico. I think it's, to be fair, I think it's a bit of a loose connection. And I also think the way the article ends out is a bit of a loose connection as well, because it decides to talk about Boris Karloff. Actually, it's called Boris South of the Border. And this section talks about the four films that Boris Karloff made in Mexico at the end of his career and his life. Now, the films are made in Mexico. So, yes, they are officially Mexican horror films, but Karloff filmed his scenes in the United States because he was in a wheelchair, he was on oxygen, and he was advised not to go to the elevation of where the filming studios were in Mexico. And so the article covers in good detail the last four films, being The Fear Chamber, Isle of the Snake People, The Incredible Invasion, and House of Evil. And yes, there's multiple titles to those films, so you might know them under different titles, but these movies I covered briefly on my blog several years ago when I did a month-long tribute to the films of Boris Karloff as part of my countdown to Halloween. And I am going to be covering those four films in greater detail next month when we do our Boris Karloff retrospective as part of episode 111 of the Classic Horrors Club podcast. So I'm not going to talk too much about them here, but there's actually a pretty good section on them. Again, I I never really, I guess they are Mexican horror films, but I guess in my mind, I've always thought those were Boris Karloff films more so than Mexican horror films. The end of the article does talk about, kind of proposes the idea that Walt Lee will return in 5 years in 1980 to cover the latest Mexican horror films. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm guessing he did not do that because of the output of Mexican horror films as we get into the later 1970s really began to be curtailed. Not nearly as many Santo films, and I don't think there's really any Santo horror films from this time period. Maybe one, but there was some thrillers and some spy thrillers and stuff. Santo films were nearing the end as well, and late 70s, not a great period for Santo. Early 80s, even less so. So I don't know that there would have been a lot of more movies to cover from that time period, unless he would have discovered some films that he hadn't talked about, like we previously mentioned. But it kind of gives the promise of things to come that we ultimately don't, to the best of my knowledge, don't get.
I also appreciated in that final bit, and I thought it was serious till I got to about the third title on the list. They were speculating on some of the future Mexican films. And I think I'm okay here. I was worried that it may be a little inappropriate, but I think we're okay. And this, I like this because it represents the movies that were big in the United States at the time. So, for example, they suggested that perhaps Mexico would make Southworld or Son of Westworld,
Yeah.
Senor Exorcist, Mexicali Rose marries baby, the Aztec mummy meets the electric Charo. That's just bad. And the tortilla that ate Acapulco. As far as I
Okay.
know, none of those were ever produced.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, though, oddly enough, I want to see Charo in a Mexican mummy or vampire film, and she's a superpower. She's got superpowers, right? And she just does her coochie 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 thing to go ahead and knock off the monsters. Sure, why not?
yeah.
Again, I'd be there. I'd watch it.
And I do have a brief epilogue. I learned that there were other Mexican monster movie articles. I don't know that there was any devoted directly to Brainiac, but it could be part of these. The first one was from May 1965, number 33. They included an article dedicated to Mexican creatures called Return of the Mexic Creatures. The August 1968, number 51 issue, that provided more coverage of the Boris Karloff movies. And I believe the parts that were in the article you read are actually lifted from that. But there's a more extensive article because I
I think
saw
they did
some.
reference another
Yeah.
writer, didn't they? Yeah, yeah, they did.
And then in 2013, number 270, which is one of the modern revivals of famous monsters, there was an article titled Santo and Wrestling Monsters. So I thought that might be one you would be interested in looking up. Now, Richard, I'm going to end on the down note and say how disappointed I am. When I talked about my magazine, I pointed out that there was a Doctor Who reference. You failed to mention in this magazine there was a 10-page Dark Shadows article. So I'm going to remember that. And we are not even, my friend.
Well, I apologize for that. I'm going to blame it on the fact that I didn't have the magazine in my hands, and so I'm
Mhm.
trying to see where the articles were, and I did see that pretty lengthy Dark Shadows article actually, so which was would have been pretty cool at the time. So I heartfelt apologies, sir.
Okay, I accept it. We're even now. So that's it. Please join us on the audio podcast to hear specifically about El Vampiro and El Etude del Vampiro. The link is in the notes below. What else? Join me and for Countdown to Halloween, a video every day the rest of the month. And Richard, you want to say what you're doing for your countdown?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm loving what you're doing, just kind of the random adventures every day. A few rabbit holes that you are sending me down. I'm looking at those Ben Cooper figures. They've got a Batman and a Joker that would look very nicely in my cabinet. My wallet isn't too sure of it, but yeah, I'm covering vampire films for the month over at Monster Movie Kid. A variety of classics. We've been doing some modern day stuff like Underworld and Blade, and by as we enter in the final week here, final weeks of the month, there'll be a couple of classics. Might be, maybe there will be. Yes, I can guarantee there will be a Mexican. I think we can call it a horror film before the end of the month, kind of a bizarre film that deals with vampires and space aliens and singing cowboys, and that'll be covered, as well as a mid 1930s vampire film that I've never seen before. It's a different take on vampires called Condemned to Live. So some
I've seen
fun
it.
stuff, along with some radio shows, Tomb of Dracula covers on Wednesdays, fun stuff.
Yeah, I've been enjoying yours as well. And those of you so inclined to join us on the Facebook group page, the Blade article generated quite a bit of conversation. It was good to see Bill Mize on there and Dominique all. Everyone's got a lot to say about Blade, so that was really cool. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll be back to see you tomorrow. Richard will be on his blog, writing to you tomorrow. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.